Hey folks, this is Paris here from Rapid Visual, and I want to talk to you a little bit about conversation-based learning and how to use Rapid Visual for customer discovery. First, I want to start with the understanding of how is conversation-based learning different from traditional interviews. So basically, if we look at conversation-based learning, you can think of it as a structured system that creates objectivity, but not as rigid as scripted interviews. Best way to create an analogy is when you're playing jazz and you have the freedom to explore and dig into where there's passion, as opposed to playing from sheet music. Everything is identical all the time. Because of this, CBL gives you the chance to actually increase the learning as opposed to just focus on data collection. Scripted interviews, you really can't change a particular question. You can't probe anywhere else because when you look back at the data you collect, you can't compare if you haven't collected the same data from everybody. Whereas CBL focuses specifically on learning, digging in, following the thread, and just exploring to understand, should you pursue this idea any further? And that leads to more truth and more use cases, people explaining their pain and the problem they have, or what would stop them from buying, as opposed to, would you buy this kind of questions that instill a certain form of politeness? But that's not really always true. So different symphonies is conversation-based learning. Identical recordings is interviews. That said, how do we run conversation-based learning? So I'll first show you the concept and the methodology, and then I'll give you some screenshots on the CBL module that's currently still under development in Rapid Visual, but feel free to explore. It's an integrated format, but you can think of it as split into two parts. Part A, we need to verify that customer profile that we created. We have this beautiful customer profile, but it's all assumptions made by the AI and you. So we need to actually confirm from a large number of people, do they have this particular profile, meaning jobs, pains, and gains? What is large number of people? B2C, 15 to 20 conversations, 15 to 20 different individuals. B2B, maybe around 5 to 10. It's enough to give you a sense of pattern detection and also the ability to have enough data so you have a good understanding of what matters to them and what is the aggregate profile. My golden rule is you stop talking to people and having conversations when every new conversation does not create new learnings. Sometimes that could be 20 interviews or conversations. Sometimes that could be more. So the first part is the profile, understanding, did we get it right? And what is the actual profile of the customer we're talking to in our customer segment? And the second part is, let's understand, what do they think of our early ideas? Based on the work that you might be doing in Rapid Visual, customer profile, jobs, pains, gains, that's part A. Customer value scenes, that's part B. And you don't talk about your solution until you get to part B. Not a single mention of the solution. You're just trying to validate the jobs, pains, and gains and understand the customer better. And then based on that, you move on to the next part. So how does it run? So if we take a more traditional viewpoint, this is how we used to do it in PowerPoint. You have the customer profile circle with jobs, pains, and gains. What we typically do, and this is why we call it a system, is that you don't really have to do a lot of preparation work to start having a conversation. Once you've prepared the assets in Rapid Visual or on any other platform like PowerPoint or Miro boards or Mural. So basically you have your own master customer profile and you use that as triggers to be able to have that conversation. What is a trigger? You show one of the jobs to be done that you came up with or that AI has helped you come up with. And the only question you ask is this you? So you present that job and you say, is this you? Conversation happens. They might say yes, and they might say yes, but. So they edited the job. And in this example, I've just come up with a simple color coding for me to know that if I make it blue, it means they edited that particular job. So you may have said something like going to the gym 3 times a week, and they say, actually, I go 4 times a week. So you corrected that. You want to know later because these are all data points to confirm or invalidate your particular understanding versus the reality once you've spoken to people. In some cases, they might say, actually, that's not me at all. There's nothing I would edit. It's just simply is not me. And then when you have this conversation in context, you also ask the question, is there something I'm missing in the context of these jobs that relate to, for example, health? Am I missing something that you do that's not on my radar screen? And they might say, actually, yes, I do this too. And you write that job. So this, in fact, is a co-creation session with a potential customer who then quickly realizes that by the end of this process that you're running with them, this profile will be them. Obviously, you've taken some time to explain what is a job pain and a gain, just some warm-up kind of conversation to get them clued in to the fact that you're going to be doing a co-creation session. Basically, this is it. Process continues with the rest of the jobs, and you present them in little clusters. And once you finish that, then you ask the question, if you were to select from all the jobs that are left, so basically minus the ones you deleted, but plus the ones that they added, which ones are the top 3? And they might say this one, that one, and that one. Great data point for later synthesis of data to understand, is there a subsegment forming that maybe does not prioritize the same way? Lots of rich data there. You do the same for pains and gains. And so this is the first part of understanding the customer profile. And then after you finish that, you move on to the next part. And the next part is learning about their appreciation of your early ideas. And we do that with customer value scenes and 9 questions that basically take this conversation to the next level. And these questions are always the same. They're there because there's a reason. There's a lot of psychology built into them, and you'll see why in a moment. So first of all, you present your customer value scene. Here's the moment of need. Here's today. Here's tomorrow. And you animate that as much as you can. Be theatrical if you have to, but take 10, 15 seconds to read out, no editorializing, just read out what is in your moment of need customer value scene, what's in today and what's in tomorrow. Once you've done that, you ask the first question, which is this moment of need relevant to you? They may say yes. Great, we'll move on. They may say maybe somewhat. Great, we'll move on. If they say no, you say thank you and you stop this customer value scene. You move on to the next customer value scene, because in this situation, while you're having this conversation, you can test 5 to 7 customer value scenes in about 15 to 20 minutes. So you're trying to test value scenes you created that correspond to different jobs, pains, and value propositions that you selected. So why do we say, let's move on if they say no? Because if it's not relevant to them, if they don't associate with that moment of need, anything they say from that point onwards is just opinions. It's not based on real experience. So then if they do say yes, or somewhat maybe, then you ask a qualitative question. Dig in. How often does this happen? When did it happen last year? What did you do last time? Did it cost you? What did it cost you? So basically you take a moment to listen to them, articulate how often, and all the stuff that, is rich data for you to learn about also the things that you didn't know. So let them talk and just listen and document, transcribe, use AI or whatever to just basically document this. The next step is a bit easier. We say, how would you rate this idea on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest? And basically they give you a score. For argument's sake, in this example, let's say they gave you a 6. Great. Here comes the psychology. The next question, number 3, is what would make our idea even more valuable for you? Why is there psychology? Because suddenly you're taking your idea and you're transferring it on to them. When anybody changes anything, they start to create some ownership into the idea you shared. But you don't want them to just go crazy with suggestions and opinions. You want to create a bit of a frame around that. So we use what's called the 4 actions framework. So you want to follow that question up with 4 questions. What is missing and why? What should be increased and why? What should be reduced and why? And what should be deleted and why? And if you're familiar with Blue Ocean Strategy, the book and the concept, this is where this comes from. So one way to remember it is plus, minus, up and down. In those dimensions, what would you do, if anything, and why? You write it down, you document it. Here comes the deeper psychological connection. If we had a magic wand and could implement all your feedback that you just gave us, how would you then rank the idea from 1 to 10? And you would expect them to say 10 because they just basically polished it and made it perfect. But typically they don't. And they might say 8. So the $1 million question, the one that really gets to the truth, is the next one. Why not a 10? See, now they're not criticizing your idea anymore. They're criticizing their contribution to your idea. So in this question, you'll get an explosion usually of, it's not a 10 because of this reason, that reason, and this other reason. In B2B, they'll start to blame people and the procurement process. In B2C, they'll talk about their budgets and lots of other things. This is why we do this. And we learn as much as possible from this process. So basically, in summary, 9 questions. Is it relevant to you? When was the last time and what happened? 0 to 10 rated, plus, minus, up, down. And what's the new score now that we implemented all your suggestions? Why is it not a 10? Now you could run this as it is. You can use PowerPoint, you can use whatever you want, or you can give it a try and test it out in Rapid Visual. So CBL, conversation-based learning, is now a brand new module that's still in beta. There may be bugs, there may be some issues, but what we are doing for sure is no matter what happens, we are collecting the data. So how would that look like? Once you're in your customer profile, a button at the top right that says conversations just above gains. And when you click on that, you basically create a cohort. So in this case, I'm going to be interviewing food bloggers. I created a cohort. And then here I am in the backstage. I won't go into too much detail, but basically it's my planning stage where I list the number of interviews. I create what's called clusters, and I'll show that in a moment. I select which value scenes of the ones that I created I want to bring into this. There's a few other things like a light survey tool. You might want to ask 3-4 other questions at the beginning of the interview just to gather some more demographics since you're talking to them. But let's focus on what matters the most, which is clusters. Clusters is basically with the ability to conduct the interview in context. The Rapid Visual will create the clusters for you. You can edit them, reallocate them, change their names. But if this is a cluster called social sharing on the top left, these are all the jobs that relate to social sharing. These are all the pains and the gains that relate to social sharing. And that's important because it actually creates a smoother conversation when you have that conversation in that context, instead of jumping around from one thing about social sharing to group logistics and back to social sharing and so on and so forth. So you create these clusters in preparation. This is still the backstage. And when you begin the interview, eventually, this is now live. We have an interview and you're doing what I've just shown you on PowerPoint, but instead you're doing this inside Rapid Visual, sharing your screen. You can check to say this is a job that they have. Maybe they edited it. Maybe they said no to it, or maybe they added a new one. You have your notes. If you hear any interesting stories, something that matters, you type it in, because everything you do, every click of the mouse, everything you type on the keyboard is a data point for the AI. And it's also a data point that you can then later export. So once you finish with job clusters, and I guess it's job pain gain clusters, then the next thing that comes up is a ranking. So you do that ranking. And then once you finish the ranking, you can drag and drop, you get to the value scenes. And this is a screenshot that basically shows what that looks like. You have your value scene and all the 9 questions are baked into the system. So you just click the answer, continue, and you move on. That way you streamline the interview. All your assets are in one place. And once you're done with that, you have some insights. Now that module is not built yet, but this is examples of what it could look like. You're seeing early alpha wireframes of what it could look like, where you're starting to see what are the top jobs, pains, and gains of everybody I interviewed. What are the things that matter to them the most? Are there some frequently edited jobs that I need to know about? Any notable quotes or stories? Any patterns or insights? Any advice, any learning? So these are the things that we're building in right now to basically we're helping the AI help us in saving weeks of data synthesis to create some intelligence. Enjoy the process and have fun.